Hi, everybody. I'm Lorraine Bennett.
And I'm Art Bennett.
Together, we wrote 3 books on temperament: The Temperament God Gave You, The Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, and The Temperament God Gave Your Kids. And you can get any of these on Amazon. So in every relationship, whether it's with your spouse or with your family, with your kids, or at work, or with your coworkers, there comes a moment, I think this happens universally, that there comes a moment when you say to yourself, what is wrong with him or her? And why doesn't he react the way I react? And I think it's a part of the human condition that we tend to think the way we react is the right way to react. And so we end up getting frustrated or confused or upset or even angry with other people when their response is so different from the way we would have responded in the same situation. Now, also what happens is we tend to assume that the other person is responding that way out of some ill will, or maybe they're angry at me, maybe they don't like me, or maybe they're just bad. And so we assume a negative thing about the different reaction, when in fact, it could be that they simply have a different temperament than we do. So that is why it's helpful to understand temperaments, because then you understand that the way the other person is responding is not necessarily out of ill will or because they are secretly hating us or because they are bad people, but rather they just respond differently. And so that's why we're talking about temperament today. So Art, what is temperament?
What is temperament? Well, temperament is, first of all, it's not your whole personality. It's just an aspect of your personality. Because your whole personality would be your background, your ethnic culture, how you were raised, the repercussions of your decisions, your birth order. There's a wide variety of education. There's a wide variety of things that make up your personality. But the temperament is part of that. We would argue a really important part of it. It's how you tend to respond or how you tend to react in certain situations. Because it's how you tend to react and stuff, you're going to kind of have a default setting of leaning that way. It's more of your nature than your nurture. So it's kind of what we call it, a kind of a God-given quality that you have. However, you're free to change it. So just because your temperament pushes you to be maybe quiet or pushes you to be kind of talkative, you can change that or overcome that prudentially in different situations. So your temperament really basically, bottom line, is how you tend to react in different situations.
Quickly or slowly, intensely or not intensely, and long-lived or short-lived.
Short-lived, right? Those are temperament reactions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So in summary, the temperaments are how you tend to react. You don't have to react that way. But we also want to be clear, when we talk about the temperaments, as we'll kind of go through them here, we're not trying to put anybody in a box. This is just a tendency you have, but you're free to respond prudentially or lovingly, however you really want to respond. Okay, Lorraine?
And in fact, once you understand your temperament, you're more likely to have a more wider range of options.
Right.
Because otherwise, if you're not aware that you're reacting out of your temperament, you might tend to actually respond more that way. So it's actually very helpful to know. So if you want to find out your temperament, you can simply go to temperamentquiz.com and take a quick test, and you will find out what temperament you are, what your main temperament is, and your secondary as well.
Right.
In our books and in our discussions here, we're talking about temperament using the old-fashioned terms, started by Hippocrates, actually. And we're just using the classic terms because it's kind of an easy handle. It doesn't mean that contemporary psychologists would use these terms, but it just has a long tradition. So we're using the terms choleric or choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic.
So we're going to talk about the 4 temperaments just real quickly, though, and we'll have subsequent videos that go into more detail. But we use, like Lorraine said, we use the 4 ancient terms, and so we'll start off with the choleric and then talk about the phlegmatic, then the sanguine and the melancholic temperaments, just to give you a little flavor of what they're about. All right, so Lorraine, you got to start with the choleric?
Okay, so the choleric, remember we were talking about reactions.
Right.
So the choleric tends to react very quickly, intensely, and long-lived. Okay, they tend to be your typical leader type, your type A personality. They are very opinionated, they're very self-confident, they goal-oriented, they like to get a lot of things done, they love productivity. In fact, not being busy, not being active, probably frustrates them. The downside is that they can be like a steamroller once they set a plan in motion. They roll over people. They can be stubborn and very self-willed, very strong-willed. They can assume that they're always right and don't want to listen to anybody else's side of the argument. They also love arguments, so as probably Art would attest.
Yep, that's right.
So that's kind of some of the strengths and weaknesses of the choleric.
Another temperament, really 180 degrees different than the choleric, is the phlegmatic. So just like the choleric likes to stir things up and come in the room and make an impression, the phlegmatic just kind of wants to blend in, doesn't want to call too much attention to himself or herself, is a real team player, just wants to cooperate and work with people, but not really be standing out or too obtrusive. Phlegmatic has wonderful qualities like teamwork, peacefulness, good ability to listen, a great temperament for having empathy for people and sympathy for things, real strength. The challenge for the phlegmatic, though, is conflict. Phlegmatics really don't have the most self-confidence, might even actually argue that the least natural self-confidence, whereas the choleric has the most self-confidence. As a result of that, they don't like to get into a lot of debates and arguments. They start to feel bad, are you going to judge me? And so they can kind of get wrapped around the axle on conflict. So phlegmatics need to bring in that beautiful harmony, that kind of cooperative spirit, which is so needed in the world, so needed in every relationship, but also have to personally work on ability to overcome conflict and also a tendency to put things off too long and deal with things right in front of them.
Mm-hmm. So the sanguine, let's talk about the sanguine. The sanguine is, in terms of reactions, they have quick, intense, but very short-lived reactions. So that makes them very enthusiastic, very energetic, and very optimistic and interested in many, many things, but also forgetful, and they struggle a little bit with follow through. Okay, so those are going to be the difficulties for the sanguine. But they're kind of like the butterflies that flit from flower to flower, new thing. They like to have lots of friends, lots of activities, lots of things to do, very positive, very upbeat, your typical party person.
That was great, the sanguine.
Yeah.
Sanguine is the most extroverted temperament, so I'm now going to tell you about the most introverted temperament, which is the melancholic. The melancholics are lovers of truth, beauty, transcendence, the great noble things of life. They care about how things are done. They care about the quality of their work, not just the quantity. They won't be bragging about how many friends they have on Facebook, but they'll tell you they have 2 or 3. They're just great people. So they're heavily quality oriented, and thank God for that. We need people like that really care about the details, that things match up right and come out in good order. That's a strength of the melancholic. The challenge for the melancholic, though, is to be more outgoing, more demonstrative of their feelings and emotion and appreciation. And also, melancholics will not shy away from an argument or a debate, but they can get frustrated maybe more easily. Again, being very introverted, the interpersonal stuff is a little bit exhausting to them sometimes, and they don't do as much outreach as they might. So that would be the thing for the melancholic to work on, is being more demonstrative with the feelings and affections and forgiveness and things like that. So there's your summary of the 4 temperaments.
So quick little example about a choleric. I have a friend who's a choleric melancholic, and she says because she is choleric, she could easily run a small country. But because she's melancholic, she is smart enough to not do that.
Let me give a short story about a phlegmatic. I am a phlegmatic, and we had to redo our bathroom. And so Lorraine knows about the phlegmatic tendency to put things off, and not make tough decisions. So she goes, okay, you can have 60 days to figure out what we're going to do with the bathroom. If you haven't done it by 60 days, on the 61st day, I'm going to take over. Okay, so I said, okay, that sounds fair. I'll get on it later or whatever. And so anyhow, on the 61st day, the door knocks, ding, 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 knock, knock. The guy comes in and goes, I'm here to fix the bathroom. I go, I didn't call you. She goes, it's the 61st day.
Yeah.
I called you.
That's
right. That's the story, how phlegmatics sometimes don't act as quickly as we should.
Yeah. They can put up with something for a long time.
Put up with something for a long time, yeah.
So here's an example of the sanguine. Okay, so we have 2 daughters, one sanguine, one melancholic. The sanguine plans the bachelorette party for the melancholic, who is the bride-to-be. And so this involved a train ride up to New York City. So the sanguine sends out an email to everybody involved and says, okay, the party starts as soon as we get on the train, and I'm bringing champagne. Well, not, a minute later, she receives an email reply with an entire list of rules and regulations of Amtrak from the melancholic, who said, I don't know if you can do that. Well, of course, the sanguine said, well, the heck with the rules. I'm bringing the champagne anyway. So they ended up having a great time anyway. So that was just a brief summary with a couple of examples for you to get an understanding of the temperaments. And in subsequent videos, we're going to go into detail on each of the temperaments. And we'll talk more about the strengths and weaknesses. And we'll also talk about communication tips that are good for the different temperaments. Because depending on your temperament, you will tend to communicate in a certain way, which sometimes can cause difficulties in the relationships.
And strengths too.
And strengths. We'll talk about that.
Right.